It never occurred to me that I would ever have a future to consider. But now that I did, I was actually getting a little excited. Fuck Alice. I could make charts that would put her little black and white bar graphs to shame. I mean, come on. It's an entire professional career being planned for. I think I could, at the very least, spring for some really fucking extravagant colored pencils, or some shit. Better yet, I was confident we could go all kinds of kingos on that motherfucker. Bella's face fell, and she looked away, huffing.
Let's be real, Edward. I can't.
She shook her head, and her voice cracked. I saw where this was going and I didn't like it. One bit. I can't was not something to be said ever. I reached for her again, but she shook me off and continued in a frustrated voice.
My recovery is too slow. I only just got comfortable here, and to move away to some crowded dorm, I just can't.
With a swallow, she finished.
There's always correspondence courses, or something to take online. It'll do.
No way in fuck was my girl going anywhere that she described using the words "it'll do." Completely ignoring the community college horseshit, I reasoned with a shrug, so we'll get off-campus housing. She met my gaze and quirked her cheek, all fucking dismissive. Come on. We can live together. It could be a fuckload of fun. I emphasized this with a furtive glance around the room to be certain we were alone, and then a very suggestive kiss below her ear. I leaned in and pressed my lips to her skin, ducking out my tongue and tasting her with a hum. Yours won't matter, I whispered huskily. She didn't seem to share my enthusiasm as I leaned back. In fact, her face grew darker, and her jaw tightened. She began in a thick voice.
I'll have to memorize the least crowded route to every class. I'll have to find a seat farthest away from people, and expect special attention from the professors. Even off campus. It's just one more house with countless closets, to remind me how far away I am from being
normal. I supposed she had come a long way, deciding not to use that very subjective term. Not that it mattered. I wanted to tell her to stop being such a fucking baby, but she'd been patient with me when I was nothing but a petulant asshole and I couldn't. Then she turned away and murmured, almost inaudibly,
I'm still 26 inches away from yours.
And shoved a lock of hair behind her ear. What?
26 inches.
She repeated with a scowl.
It's how close I can get to your closet before I completely freak out.
And then she hugged her knees, which was clearly her closing herself off. Fuck, Bella, I groaned, tugging at my hair. I was having difficulty remaining patient, so I took a deep breath. This is all a bunch of bullshit. You've been doing better, I reminded softly. Remember Tyler? And how I wanted to stab him in the nutsack. Frustrated, she slapped the loose tendrils of hair from her face, and glared straight ahead.
Fuck Tyler.
It was then that I realized that it was one of those days. One of those shitty, annoying, fud you all days. Possibly some PMS type shit, I mutely noted, having learned by now after living with so many women, that it was to be thought, but never, ever said aloud. I decided that I was sick, and fucking tired of those kinds of days. I knew they'd come and go, and my girl would probably fail more than she'd succeed, and I'd have to sit by and watch that shit, like it wasn't killing me. But not tonight. She was welching. That's right. Fucking welching. Here I was busting my ass to go to therapy, to learn more about helping her, and she was backing down. It was so unfucking fair. I refused to allow what was some kind of blatant regression, or some shit. She'd come too far. I'd come too far. We'd earned our stupid fucking color-coded college charts. I stood up, extended my hand, and ordered, come on. She pretty much just kept glowering at the wall, so I grabbed her hand myself, and lifted her off the sofa. She questioned me with a haughty glare as I dragged her up the stairs, irritated and grumpy, and killing my chart buzz. Don't point out the Midol in the medicine cabinet, I chanted with every step. Then when we stood in the room, 30 inches from my closet, recognition dawned on her face, and her eyes widened. My closet wasn't much. I knew she'd gone to therapy with the initial intentions of both pissing me off and snooping in my shit. That little space was inaccessible to her, and I figured it drove her crazy. After all this time dwelling, I wouldn't be surprised if she had formed over-the-top impressions of it. Her skewed version probably included something like porn and photos of girls from school and God only knows what else. In reality, my closet was pretty fucking boring. It also terrified her. She avoided that whole section of the room, and always had. I kept my laundry hamper outside of it like she'd had it set up before I'd come home, and she kept her clothes in the guest bedroom or shoved into her half of my dresser. Honestly, I couldn't personally understand it. Some really asinine and simplistic part of myself wondered what was so damn difficult about going to a door, opening it, and going inside. But that was ignorant and I knew better. Even though entering that closet seemed easy to me, her fear of it was as real to me as the closet itself. Rationally, I knew that I couldn't ever understand that portion of her mind. That was just as fucking frustrating to me as her limitations were to her. My frustration was mostly due to my ignorance, though my inability to comprehend it, or take it all on myself. She turned to me then, and met my gaze. Her expression made me seriously reconsider this whole thing. Her eyes were actually Terry.
I already told you I can't,
she insisted in this small, shaky voice that tugged at my chest. She looked so fucking apologetic, like she was letting me down by reminding me that this little task was beyond her abilities. So I grabbed her shoulders and spun her around, pressing her back against my chest as I shushed her, and pleaded, "You can't do it with me here." We both knew what I was asking. She probably needed to do it on her own, but this wasn't about some bullshit dependency that Carmen liked to harp about. It wasn't even a gift from me to her. If she allowed me, then I'd be at her side every single day, to get her into a closet. When she needed her shoes or needed to put her clothes in the laundry hamper, or just wanted to get out her winter jacket, I'd be there. It was a promise. There's a big difference between dependency and commitment. I watched her face as she stared ahead at the door, contemplating my offer. It was obvious that, with all of her recently large accomplishments, her smaller failures made more of an impact on her confidence. She'd already been told the cliché drum wasn't built in a day bullshit. She knew she needed patience, and technically, she had been more patient than most would be in her position. Carmen could tell her what Carmen believed her biggest hurdles to be, but my girl knew what accomplishments meant most to her, and this closet was obviously high on that list. The slow curling of her lips into a watery smile told me that she was alright with attempting to cross that off, once and for all.
Okay,
she finally whispered with a small, nervous nod. Her little grin and subtle bounce betrayed her anticipation. I wanted to chuckle, but I didn't, because I realized that it was still very possible that she would be incapable of making it, and I'd have to watch that disappointment and anguish when she didn't. With a stealing breath, I replaced my hands to her shoulders and instructed her to close her eyes. I began kneading her muscles, utilizing the knowledge I'd gained from Carmen on helping her. She sighed, and her shoulders began to gradually relax, her hands going limp at her sides. I shoved my fingers beneath her shirt collar for skin-to-skin contact, and buried my nose in her hair, because Carmen might know all of that technical bullshit, but I knew the subtle methods that worked best. When she began swaying with my knees, I knew she was as relaxed as she could possibly get without collapsing, so I nudged her forward. Her eyes opened, and she took the steps to the presumable 26-inch mark. She wasn't freaking out, but I knew that my presence was responsible. I continued massaging, and kept my toes at her heels, forcing her to take steps with me. Her back would tense with every small step, and I'd have to work that much harder to relax her again. When we finally made it to the door, her breathing began to change. It was a discrete deviation in rhythm. I trained my eyes on the pulse point on her neck, which accelerated minutely. I frowned as my fingers molded against the skin of her back. We hadn't even opened the door yet, and already, this was the point in which I'd stop. It took longer to relax her, and I wasn't even able to do that entirely. Her back moved against me, rising and falling in shorter, sharper breaths as we stared at the white, painted wood. Her palms rubbed against her denim-clad thighs, and her eyes grew wider with every second. She was dwelling. When I reached for the knob, she began shaking. her breath escaping in small, erratic gasps.
I can't,
she rasped, pressing back against me and turning her face to meet my gaze. What I saw there fucking door at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed and silent tears trailed down her cheeks. It wasn't even about disappointment or failure anymore. This was pure, unadulterated fear. Getting away from that closet was at that moment the most important thing in her world. Her eyes said, fuck college, fuck Carmen, fuck normal. Get me the hell out of here. Her feet shuffled back, but were blocked by mine. I couldn't decide which would be better, easing her in the short term, or pushing her now and gaining more for the long term. Admittedly, my girl had me wrapped around her little finger. I was a total fucking pushover. I would give her anything to make her happy, but that was a given. Could I make her suffer now, if it meant making her happy later? I decided that I hated it, fucking loathed it, really, but I could. She did it for me, and it was worth it. I just needed to get her to see that frame of reference again. Her fear was clouding it. Thus, I held her gaze with a firm stare, and decided, in the words of a very pretty girl, stop being chicken shit. She whimpered, and snapped her gaze ahead, realizing just how meaningful my words were. She nodded, but also began breathing more heavily, her intermittent shaking transforming into violent, alarming tremors. She seemed to have her mind made up that she was doing it, and this seemed to amplify her anxiety tenfold. "SHHH, I whispered in her ear and ran my hands along her arms, but they were covered. So I grabbed the hem of her sweater and brought it over her head, only just barely managing to slip it off without losing contact. Her plain white t-shirt beneath was thin, and my palms rubbed soothingly on her now bare arms, up her neck, and across her stomach. And then I took her hand in mine, and put them on the knob. I almost expected her to yank it back, but she didn't. She gripped that motherfucker so tightly that it rattled with her vibrating arm. Her breathing was starting to worry me, but I still turned the knob, slowly guiding her hand to fully twist it. I refused to let her down by conceding. She'd thank me for it later, I really fucking hoped. Together, we pulled it open in one swift motion, and then, I was staring at my rack of hanging clothing and darkness. Our hands were still fixed on the knob and bellowed. It was this weird, high-pitched sound that reminded me of a dying animal. The rattling of the brass knob grew louder, and her inhales were so short that it seemed as though she couldn't get any air at all. My heart began racing. Panicked and scared a little shitless that she'd just black out, I hastily shoved my hand up the front of her shirt and flattened my palm to her chest. I crushed her tightly against me and instructed urgently into her ear, visualize, like Carmen said. Fuck, Bella. Feel my breathing and match it, okay? She nodded fervently, and closed her eyes, but continued wheezing. I decided to give her 1 minute before I drew back, and slammed the door closed. It was worth a lot, but it wasn't worth her immediate health. I swept her hair back from her face pale and taut and whispered stupid, ridiculous things in her ear. With my every word, her breathing gradually deepened, so I kept going. I said stupid shit like, the King of Hearts is the only king without a mustache in a standard deck of playing cards, and Evian spelled backwards is naive, and the Nobel Peace Prize is totally gay, because it's 3 naked motherfuckers just standing there, touching each other, and the word testify was created by men in the Roman court who would swear on their testicles, and a barnacle has the biggest dick of any other animal in the world in relation to its size, and iguanas, koalas and Komodo dragons all have 2. At this, she cracked one eye, meeting my gaze, and furrowing her brow.
Judix?
She asked, her breathing now nowhere near normal, but at a far less terrifying tempo. I nodded, and smirked tightly, continuing, a whale's penis is called a dork. She nodded, raising her eyebrows.
You sure do know a lot about dicks and testicles, and gaming and mustaches and designer drinking water.
She punctuated this with what I assumed was meant to be a mocking glance, though a weak one. I explained, I chose what I thought might be points of interest to you. I know you sure are interested when you're washing mine, and then I winked. With a small grin, her almost blush brought back some color to her cheeks, and I felt myself breathe a sigh of relief. Turning back the closet, she tensed again, but didn't start wheezing, so I simply removed my hand from her shirt and continued massaging her stiff shoulders.
Edward.